warm welcome to the public policy model, that is Poli 3.5, public policy making. We are now on the 6th session, and the title of the 6th session is Nature and Scope of Public Policy Making. Now, the first topic in the nature and scope of public policy making is what we refer to as the definition of public policy. Public policy defies a precise definition. For this reason, there are many definitions of public policy. Each definition emphasizes a particular dimension of reality of the discipline. But none of the definitions is as exhaustive as to cover all the dimensions of reality of the subject. The definitions offered here are from Thomas Dye, William Jenkins, James Anderson, and Yehezkel Drow. Now, let's take Thomas Dye's definition first. What is important about definition is not just to rattle the definition and go away, but to isolate the important elements of the definition so that you can explain them and see how the definitions give us the content that we want to have. So let's look at the definition of Thomas Dye. Thomas Dye has two definitions of public policy. The first one is anything government chooses to do or not to do. The second definition is what governments do, why they do it, and what difference it makes. Now, we can isolate the important elements of Dye's definition. The important elements of Dye's definitions are, one, government is the agent of policy. And when we say government is the agent of policy, it is through governments that policies are developed and implemented. The funds for the implementation of public policy come from government. And it is through government apparatus that public policy is implemented. And it is government that takes responsibility for the outcomes of policies. And that is why we say that government is the agent of policy. The second one is government makes choices in the course of making policies. In other words, policies are made, but they are made through choices. And a choice is the selection of an alternative from among a series of competing alternatives. Government action and decisions can be positive, they can be negative, or they can be what we refer to as non-decisions. Now, so what is a positive decision? A positive decision is a decision that is taken to change the status quo, and we call that the positive decision. So, for example, if we make a decision that, look, let's increase the tax rate from 10% to 12%. If we agree on that change, then the change will happen. And that change is a positive decision because it involves a change of the status quo. The status quo is the 10% we used to have, and then the 12% is the new rate that we have, and we call it the change. So maintaining the status quo means that we must have only what we have. So a negative decision, on the other hand, is a decision not to change the status quo. So if we refuse to change the status quo but maintain it at where it was, then we say we have a negative decision. So if we propose to increase the tax from 10% to 12%, but there's no consensus on it, and we have not been able to increase it to 12%, and we leave it at 10%, then we call that proposal a negative decision because the decision to change it has not succeeded. Then we have what we call a non-decision. A non-decision is a situation where government has not given us a clue as to whether it will change the decision that we want, so that we have a new decision, a new situation, or it will not change it. In other words, government remains silent on the proposals that we have given to it. It is not telling us that it will deal with the problem, but it is not also dealing with the problem. And we refer to that as a non-decision. Then let's look at the definition of William Jenkins. William Jenkins says that policy is a set of interrelated decisions taken by a political actor or group of actors concerning the selection of goals and the means of achieving them within a specified situation, where these decisions should, in principle, be within the power of the actors to achieve. Now, the key elements in this definition are the following. Public policy making is a process rather than an event. Now, a process is a set of interrelated activities that leads to a common outcome. So, it is made up of series of interlinked decisions or activities. But an event is just one activity, and that is the difference. So William Jenkins is trying to tell us that public policy is not an event, it's a process because it is made up of a series of interlinked activities. 2, public policy is made up of interrelated decisions, meaning that hardly will one decision solve a public policy problem, and hardly will one decision coincide with public policy. Public policy making consumes resources. That's why he wants us wants to tell us, meaning that public policy can only see the day of light if we commit resources to them. And the resources public policy need is money. The resources public policy need is equipment. The resources public policy need is information. The resources public policy need is time. The resources public policy making is apparatus and all that. Now, public policy making is goal-oriented. In other words, public policy is purposive. There is a deliberate intention behind the decision to embark on policy. Now, the definition of James Anderson. Anderson says that a policy is a purposive course of action followed by an actor or set of actors in dealing with a problem or matter of concern. The key elements in his definition are the following. 1, there are multiple actors in the public policy making arena. There are multiple actors, meaning that it is not only government, unlike Thomas Dye, who tend to think that government is the sole agent of policy. Anderson says that there are other actors rather than just government. And the other actors are non-governmental actors, like, for example, the media, like, for example, think tanks, like, for example, faith-based organizations, like, for example, NGOs. All these are part and they all make proposals for policy. And therefore, government alone is not the sole agent of policy. Now, the second point is government ultimately determines policy and is responsible for implementation of an evaluation. So even though we are saying that government is not the sole actor in public policy making, ultimately, it is government that is responsible for its implementation and its evaluation and the responsibility for its outcomes. Establishes a link between government action and perception, real or otherwise, of the existence of a problem or concern requiring action. Now, what this simply means is that the previous 2 definitions have not specifically mentioned a problem, and there cannot be public policy if there is no problem. So it is Anderson who is the first to draw our attention to the existence of a problem, that once there is no problem, there is no policy. Because policies are meant to address problems. So there must first be a problem before we even try to think about solutions. So that's why he's trying to tell us. Now let's look at the definition of Yehiskill-Drow. Yehiskill-Drow has the most comprehensive definition of public policy. And he says that a policy is a very complex and dynamic process whose various components make different contributions to it. It decides major guidelines for action directed at the future mainly by governmental organizations. These guidelines on policy formally aim at achieving what is in the public interest by the best possible means. Now, what are the key elements? 1, public policy making is complex and a dynamic process. Now, what this means is that by complexity, we are trying to understand that there are multiple actors, each with its own hopes, fears, anxieties, interests, and these interests conflict rather than converge. And because of this conflicting nature of their interests, it is difficult to reach an agreement to proceed on making policy. The other reason why we say it's complex is because it's done at multiple levels, at the national level, at the district level, the regional level, and the sub-level. And each of these levels have serious problems with coordinating to get a complete picture of what is done at the various levels. We say it is dynamic because it is not a static phenomenon. It changes as our hopes change. It changes as our beliefs change. It changes as our expressions change. It changes as the environment changes. And that is why we say that public policy is dynamic. So as our hopes change, we need to change policies. Public policy aims at achieving the public interest. And we have already understood that the public interest is the interest of the generality of the population. So what Yehiskill-Drow is telling us is that public policy should ideally aim at achieving the interest of the generality of the population of a country. The last point here is public policy should be made efficiently and effectively. By efficiency, he means that the value of the inputs, that is the amount of money we wasted in getting the policy done, should give us an outcome or an output that is far higher in value than the inputs that we have made. Then effectiveness means that public policy must achieve its objectives. Now, having looked at these 4 definitions, The next thing we need to do is to draw a thread that runs through all these definitions. And the thread goes this way, a number of points linked up with all these definitions. A policy is a set of decisions or courses of action. It is intentional and is undertaken by government and other actors. So we must understand that public policy is not made by only government, it's made by government and other actors. It concerns the method of accomplishing the purpose within a specified situation. So we must adapt certain ways, strategies to make policy, and we must do it within a context. It involves the assessment of pros and cons of alternative courses of action. And what this means is that anytime we are going to embark on any action and we choose any pathway to doing it, there will be advantages, there will be disadvantages. Then let's weigh the advantages against the disadvantages. If the advantages are more than the disadvantages, then it signals that that is the right way to go, then we should embark on that. It extends over time rather than being separate, discrete decisions. Public policy is not made in one day or one sitting, but it can extend over days, over weeks, over months, or even years. It is purposive or goal-oriented rather than due to chance. It is planned activity. It is deliberate. That's why we say it is goal-oriented. It is not done by chance. We have planned it, and that's why we say it is deliberate. It authoritatively guides the numerous decisions made in implementing the objectives chosen. So there must be a deliberate effort by government to make sure that all the actions we are taking will lead us to what we want. It connotes interaction with the environment, and what this means is that the environment has factors. Some of these factors are facilitating policy making, and some of these factors are thwarting policy making. And we must make sure that we control the constraining factors so that we can allow the facilitating factors to operate. Then the environment imposes constraints on the attainment of objectives because of the items that are there, that is the constraints there. The term policy is used here to embrace both what is intended and what occurs as a result of the intention. Now what it means is that public policy will give us outcomes. Some of these outcomes will be what we intended to have, but some of them will be things we didn't intend, but it has come with a policy. For example, if you dam a river to get hydroelectric power, but it has flooded farms, settlements downstream beyond what you imagine. Now, the flooding of the businesses and the homes was not what you intended, but you only wanted the hydroelectric power. Yes, now you have gotten the electric power, but you also have something on your hand you didn't plan for. That is the flooding. So even though the flooding was not intended, you cannot run away from it. It is part of the policy. It is because of the policy that you had these problems. Then the next one is that it is operationally identified not by its goals. Rather, it is identified by its actual behavior in attempting to effect the goals. Now, what this simply means is that policy is not what we see on paper. Policy is what we see being done on the ground. So if we make on paper that we are going to construct a 10-kilometer road, and then we come to the ground, but because of lack of funds, because of lack of logistics, we are only able to do 5 kilometers. The 5 kilometers is the actual policy. It is not the 10 kilometers that is on the paper. And that is what we mean by it's done by looking at the actual behavior on the ground. That is why we refer to as. Public policy then is policy developed and pursued under the authority of government. No policy becomes policy until that policy is done under the authority, the supervision of government. If it is not done by government, then it is not public policy. Public policy making is concerned with development, implementation, and evaluation of public policies. So what are the characteristics of public policy? One, it is very complex, and we have already explained the complexity because it involves a multiplicity of actors, multiplicity of levels in the making of the policy, multiplicity of interests that conflict rather than converge. Now we talk about the dynamism of public policy, and that means that there are continuous changes that will happen in public policy. It involves multiplicity of various components, structures and substructures. The different structures and substructures make different contributions to public policy. Those at the regional level, the national level, the sub-district level, they all make different contributions to public policy. It involves decision making, and decisions are a choice of an alternative from among a series of competing alternatives. And what this simply means is that no single decision will be stand as policy, but policy is made up of a series of interlinked decisions. And that's why we say that it involves decision making. It lays out general directives rather than detailed orders. When public policy comes from Parliament passed, it does not come in detail. but it comes as a broad outline. For example, if we have an energy policy, the energy policy will say that we have made this policy today, and the energy policy is supposed to give us sustainable, affordable, universal energy for everybody. Now, it is left for the bureaucrats to go and work out what they mean by sustainability, what they mean by affordability, what they mean by universality. So, public policy is set out in broad guidelines. It is action-oriented and result in external action, meaning that if you make policy and you leave it on the table, it will continue to be on the shelf. But if you make policy, you need to come out, get the money, draw up the programs and projects so that it will be implemented before you can get the result. It is futuristic, meaning that it introduces the ever-present element of uncertainty, meaning that public policy also is made today, but we don't get the results today, the results play out tomorrow. It is mainly conducted by governmental organizations. So even though private organizations participate, civil society organizations participate, at the end of the day, the responsibility for making policy rests with government. It formally aims at achieving what is in the public interest. We have said that already, and the public interest, as I said, is the interest of the generality of the population of the country. It aims at achieving the public interest by the best possible means, meaning that public policy must achieve in an efficient and in an effective way. That is what we mean. So let's look at the decision between a policy and a decision. Decision making denotes the choice of an alternative from among a series of competing alternatives. It is a conscious choice between two or more alternatives. A policy is a purposive course of action or inaction followed by an actor or set of actors in dealing with a matter of concern. A person makes a decision, but a group makes a policy. A policy has wider ramifications and a long-term perspective than a decision. A policy is bigger than a decision, meaning that a series of decisions come to make public policy. So hardly will a policy coincide with a single decision. That is what is being said here. So what is the distinction between a policy and a program? A policy, as we have said, is a broad statement of goals and means. A program consists of the actions to achieve the ends of a stated policy. So all the activities we conduct to be able to ensure that the aims of the policy are realized is what we refer to as a program. A variety of programs may be developed in response to the same policy goals. So, for example, we have the school feeding, we have the Ghana education policy, and several programs have come under it. For example, we have the school feeding program, we have the school uniform program, we have the school standards program, several programs. We have the girl parity in education program, girl science education program. All these are meant to help the education policy succeed. So that is why we say that a program is different from a policy, because series of programs come to make a policy. For example, the school feeding program, the school standards program, as I've explained, are all programs under the Ghana education policy that we drew up in 1986. So what is the distinction between a policy and law? A policy is a broad statement of goals and means. Law is a system of rules and guidelines usually enforced through a set of institutions. So as a country, we draw up the laws and we give these policies to institutions to implement. So the law courts are the institutions that are supposed to watch over the implementation of these policies, and any deviations are investigated by these courts, and then culprits are punished. Law shapes politics, economics, and society. Why? Because it mediates the behavior of those who work in politics, who work in economics, who work in society. Law serves as a mediator of relations between people, and therefore, in the relationship between people, the law is the one that will let them know which is the appropriate way to behave in a way that we don't infringe on the rights of each other. Law can compel or prohibit behavior. Example, requiring the payment of taxes and making abortion illegal. So that is the way law compels our behavior. Nobody wants to pay tax, but we are compelled to pay tax. So that is why we say that law compels behavior. While policy merely guides action towards those that are more likely to achieve desired outcomes. So policy is only meant to address public policy problems. Public policy must be formulated within a legal framework, meaning that there is a chosen way, there is a legally accepted way of doing public policy, and there are rules and games for doing public policy. Now, the distinction between a policy and a law continues. Law is a traditional instrument of government policy. Law provides the final guarantee that policy intention can be translated into action. Law can facilitate, allowing a course of action. Law can coerce, requiring or prohibiting a certain behavior. Law creates and governs institutions. Some laws are symbolic, stating aspiration of social value. Laws are also binding on government and may impose specific or unique obligations on the political, policy, and administrative domains. Now, the distinction between policy and politics. Politics refer to art and science of governing a political entity like a nation. Politics generally revolves around government and its activities. Politics refers to the theory and practice of governance. Politics denotes authority and public life. In a democratic system, political parties run the government. These parties all adhere to certain policies. Policy is an overall plan of a government's general goals. A policy is a statement of intent with the accompanying means to translate it into concrete phenomena. It is on the basis of policies that a government is held accountable. All public policies are inherently political. And why do we say they are inherently political? Because policies involve political decisions, made not just by politicians, but by a range of decision makers. These decisions are complex. They necessitate the weighing of competing interests. Policy decisions necessitate cooperation and competition. A policy decision also necessitates conflict. And even political activity, there is conflict, there is disagreement, there is competition. Politics means more than just the business of government. Politics is an aspect of all social relations. Politics is a central part of any situation where groups of people make decisions. Policy making is political because it entails the distribution of power among and between groups and individuals. The distribution of power is unequal and results in winners and gainers. Thus, policy is political because it involves conflict and cooperation. It involves struggle for power and influence. It involves struggle for authority. The struggle involves groups and individuals, both inside and outside government. Politics is not only about implementing party platforms. It also involves attaining and keeping government through policies that attract voters. Philosophy and ideology are important in politics. But pragmatic politics involves judgment on the consequences of government decisions. At the center of the political world is the office of the president. In majoritarian parliamentary system, the presidents are very powerful and can easily pass their policies. Presidents in such systems must offer effective leadership. While doing so, they should also be able to maintain party support. The standard test of effective leadership is electability. Leaders who can win next elections carry colleagues along. Leaders must matter because they provide a public identity for a government. Presidents also provide a sense of coherence and direction. Leaders play both political and policy roles. Leaders are the juncture at which politics and policy meet. Political advisors are largely confined to the political world. Presidents must reach beyond the confines of parliament and the executive office to engage the broader agenda of public policy. A government stands or falls on its policies. These choices must be well considered and sufficiently coordinated. Coordinating ensures that one policy does not undermine another. Government needs to develop and monitor policy. Government also needs to achieve consistency across the many agencies which make up a modern public sector. Much of substantive policy development takes place in government agencies. It also takes place in interdepartmental committees. Now, let's look at the link between public policy and public administration. Now, this link is important because it is the administrators who carry out public policy. And that is why we need to establish the link between public policy and then public administration. Public administration involves activity. It is concerned with politics and policy making. It tends to be concentrated in the executive branch of government. It is concerned with implementing policy and law. The discipline of public administration has a wide scope. Thus, its definition reflects its omnibus character. Public administration is the use of managerial, legal, political theories and processes to fulfill legislative, executive, and governmental mandates. These mandates involve the provision of regulatory and service functions for society as a whole. Thus, the public administrator plans, organizes, implements these processes for the achievement of the governmental mandates. The mandate of government includes the achievement of political, economic, and social objectives. These three categories of objectives are supposed to improve the well-being of the people. Public administration is the study of the public sector. Public administration refers to how the administrative parts of government are organized, process information, produce output in policy, law, and goods. Public administration is an activity serving the public. Public servants carry out policies derived from others. Public administration is concerned with procedures. Public administration is also concerned with translating policies into action. Public administration is also concerned with office management. Public administration focuses on procedures and propriety. Public management involves much more than public administration. Instead of merely following instructions, a public manager focuses on achieving results. The public manager then takes responsibility for the results achieved. Thus, public administration has lost favor as the description of the work done by appointed officers. The term manager is more common these days. And that is why today, public administrators don't want you to call them public administrators, because they think that if you call them public administrators, it means they are just simply taking some people's actions and they are working on some people's instructions. They now want to feel that they also take actions and they are responsible for results, and therefore they should be called public managers rather than just public administrators. Yes. So let's look at the link between policy and budget. Government policy objectives can be achieved through tax policy, public expenditure policy, and combination of tax and expenditure policies. Thus, direct comparisons are needed of the costs and benefits of alternative revenue and expenditure packages. Now, what this means is that a budget is nothing more than government intentions that is coached in activities, and these activities are given price tags. A sound program of public expenditure requires a realistic estimate of revenue. This is because choice cannot be made without a clear idea of how much is likely to be available. So that is why any budget must involve revenue raising and then expenditure making. An expenditure program that does not conform to a realistic limit of resources available is a wish list. Now, what this means is that if you merely tell us what you want to do without pegging it against the amount of money that you have to do it, then you end up doing some and not doing others. So you need to look at your money first, how much you have, then think about the policies and programs you want to roll out. Such a list is not a program, and the budget that contains it is only bulky paper document. Expenditure should establish a strong link between government policies and the budget that is intended to implement them. For this link to be strong, policy choices themselves must first meet certain basic criteria. These criteria include the following: discipline. Policies should be consistent without contradictions. And therefore, you must not make a policy here and then it conflicts with another thing over there, which is part of the same policy. Realistic. Policies should be affordable and implementable. If you cut the policy such that it's too huge for you to implement, then it is not realistic. Policies must be stable, meaning frequent policy reversals should be avoided. You make a policy today, tomorrow you come and say, no, this policy is not good, let me change it. If you do that, then the policy cannot have stability. Policies must be open, meaning the criteria and processes of decision making should be explicit and public. Any decision about public policy should be known to the public. And it must be such that it is clear enough for people to see it and to understand it. Then the next thing is that it must be selective, meaning that you must filter out minor matters and prevent wasting political leaders' time and attention. In other words, only the most important issue pertinent to the policy must be included in the policy proposal that you are putting across. Then the next thing is communicate. That is communication. A badly understood policy cannot be implemented and is unlikely to properly reflect in the budget. In other words, any proposal you are putting across, make sure that it is comprehensible, it is legible, and then everybody understands its intent and its purposes. Now, let's look at types of policies. According to Lawi, policies can be classified as substantive and procedural, distributive, redistributive, or regulatory. Or policies can be material or they can be symbolic. Now, when we say policy is substantive, it means that we are looking at concrete things that policy is going to bring to us. When we say policy is procedural, then we are looking at the mechanism, the processes we are going to follow to be able to deliver something that we can call policy. When we say that policy is distributive, it means that policy must be such that the goods that it is going to produce must be shared among the citizens of the country. Policies must be redistributive. In other words, they are policies that are meant to ensure that those who do not have within society, those who have more will be able to subsidize those who do not have. In other words, when we implement progressive policies, these progressive policies will take tax from the rich, and the money so derived will be used to provide services and facilities for the poor. And that policy, such an activity or mechanism, is what we refer to as redistributive policies. Policies can also be regulatory. In other words, policy will tell us what to do and what not to do, what is prohibited under the law and what is permissible under the law, and what sanctions will be attached if we fail to do what we are required to do, or when we do what we are not expected to do. Policy can be material or it can be symbolic. So if we merely exhort people to be patriotic, then that is a symbolic policy. But when we make a policy to deliver water, for example, then that is a material policy. Then Fiona has an alternative classification of policy, and he classified policies into productive issue policies, distributive issue policies, consumption issues policy, identity issue policies, and reflexive issue policies. Now, productive issue policies has to do with the means of producing any good or service. Distributive issues has to do with how we share the cake after producing it. Then consumption issues has to do with what goods are good for us to consume and what quantities are we getting to consume. What goods are not good for us to consume, and what steps are we making sure that those goods that are not good for us, we don't really consume them. Identity issue policies. In other words, it tries to tell us where we belong, what ideologies, things that we profess for ourselves and our country. And these ideals, if we uphold them, are these identity issues. So issues relating to nationality, issues relating to patriotism, issues relating to acquisition of naturalization, and all others will fall under what we call the identity issues. So, reasons for studying public policy. There are various reasons, multiple reasons for studying public policy. One, we learn about concrete solutions to practical problems. So when we study public policy, we can devise means to solving policy problems that are actually confronting society. Two, understanding the causes and consequences of policy improve our knowledge of society. If we are in the business of trying to know the causes and the consequences of policy, then we will know how society lives, how society functions, and what things are good for society that should be provided and how to provide them, and what things are not good for them and how to avoid them. Three, knowing the causes and consequences of policies enable us to apply social science knowledge to solve problems. So if we know the causes and consequences of problems, then we can equally devise means to deal with these problems that will confront us. Number four, we are able to inform political discussions, advance the level of political awareness, and improve policies quality. In other words, if we are able to know the causes, the consequences of problems, then we'll be able to make frank discussions, know what works in practice, know what doesn't work in practice, and try to see which policies and options that we are going to take to actually devise the means to solving public policy problems that actually confront us as a society. Policy analysis becomes a profession to those who study it. So some people can choose public policy as a career path, and therefore study public policy, become policy analysts, become government advisors, become lecturers in universities, and all that. So public policy is studied for these other reasons. We build our characters through studying public policy. When we study public policy, it gives us some discipline as to how we handle ourselves and handle others. It tells us that interaction among people needs a set of relationship, and this relationship must have reciprocity. That is, respect others, others respect you, tolerate other people's viewpoints so that others will also appreciate your viewpoint. Policy studies is a vehicle for contesting the existing order. In other words, if we have problems today and we have always been using the same methods of solving it, public policy study will tell us that get out of the box, look at other novel ways of solving the problem. So if we look at public policy and study it, it will equip us to go and search for new ways of solving public policy problems. Policy studies also spare us the urge to assert our right to participate in public affairs. In other words, when we study public policy, we are able to stamp our feet and say that we have a right to participate in affairs that affect us. And therefore, when making public policy, we also want a voice. We want to contribute to public policy. That is why we tell public policy decision makers. Policy studies help draw attention to a range of things happening around us. If you don't study policy, you don't even know the policy problems that confront society. If you don't even know the policy problems that confront society, how will you even know the policy options for dealing with these problems? So let's look at public policy in a globalized world. Globalization is one of the key challenges in contemporary policy making. The forces of globalization include the following. Technological change. If there is technological change, then it makes every available thing, existing things that we were making useless. For example, long before, nobody really used computers. Long before, nobody really had an electronic way of delivering anything. Today, you can stand here and deliver to people living at different locations. So who will hook on to the traditional way of delivering lectures? So we are doing this because, and we can reach people from different parts of this country because of technological change. And therefore, this technological change is telling policymakers that they should revise their means, they should revise their apparatus, they should revise their tools and equipment for making public policy. So in a globalized world, as technology changes, then the tools, the apparatus that we use will also change. Neoliberal economic ideology. So the neoliberal economic ideology is telling us that, look, markets must function and they must be allowed the freedom to function. But government must intervene only when the market is not working very well. And it is part of the globalization movement. Travel by transnational cooperation for higher profitability. Today, we are seeing that companies from different countries are now running to other countries to settle and to make more profit and to provide more goods. So companies know no borders today. And they are moving across borders and they are trying to establish everywhere, anywhere in this world. Economic, social, and cultural integration. And we are seeing that the cultures are beginning to merge and people all over the world are beginning to copy each other's ways of life. Now, two important happenings associated with globalization altered public policy making. These events are governance as a concept has become more fragmented. Two, the concept of public left the national confines and assumed more global definition. So the first one, which is governance as a concept, has become more fragmented. What does it really mean? Now, what this does mean is that today, you cannot talk about just people within your country. Now, we have what we call the EU, the African Union. And now, it is now speaking to a broader audience, which is called the African Union, or the African people, or the European people, or whatever people. Now, all these people are clamoring to be heard. And then there is a struggle between, are we, for example, Ghanaians, or are we Africans who are within an African Union? Or are we Europeans, or are we British within a British Union? There's a conflict between that. Then the next one, the concept of public left the national confines and assumed more global definition. And therefore, because we have joined unions like ECOWAS, like ILO, like WTO, it is now very difficult to really talk about a public or a nation, because the nation's borders have become now more porous because other people probe their noses into what we do. For example, we go for loans, and when we go for loans, then the World Bank and the IMF will dictate to us what policies we should implement. But the IMF and the World Bank are not here They are across our borders, yet they determine what happens here in this country. And that's why we are saying that the national borders have now become more porous and much more open to globalization. Thus, public policy making, an era of globalization, is occurring in an institutional void. And when we say institutional void, there is no specific identifiable organization or institution that is responsible for the making of certain policies. For example, a policy area like climate change. Climate change is an area that affects everybody across the globe. So, which is the international body or national body that will police what everybody is doing across the globe? So, policy making in such an environment will occur in an institutional void because there's no designated institution either within nations or across nations that is responsible for making these policies. In this void, there are no clear rules and norms of the game of policy making. So, we have come to the end of this session, and we have been looking at the nature and scope of public policy making. And in this, we have tried to define public policy. We have tried to distinguish between public policy, program, law, politics, public administration, budget, and all that. And we have done all these to let you understand that public policy making is a vast field. It's a very complex process, and it involves a lot of activities, a lot of stakeholders, and therefore in making it, we need to make concessions, bargains, to be able to move forward in making public policy. Thank you, and thank you for listening.